Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Leah Naomi. Today, we're going to talk about Star Wars Episode 9, Rise of the Skywalker. We're also going to be talking about Rey's journey in general over the last trilogy in the Star Wars set. And we're going to finish it off with a review of the Jedi Fallen Order video game. So let's just jump right in. So this weekend was the release of the last movie in the most recent Star Wars trilogy. The movie Star Wars Rise of Skywalker grossed $176 million in the US, $374 million globally. Holy moly, that's a lot of money. Overall, the reviews have said 7 out of 10 on IMDb, 57% on Rotten Tomatoes, and 74% of Google liked it. Not great reviews. Overall, I really enjoyed the movie, so I don't necessarily agree with those stats, but we'll get into the pros and cons here in a little bit. Rey, Finn, and Poe follow the Jedi story along to its final culmination in the last installment of this trilogy of trilogies. It is 2.5 hours of basically constant story progression. I feel like I need to watch it again. So much happened so quickly. There were so many unanswered questions over the course of the last several movies that I feel like they tried to answer every single question and make fans of the saga overall happy. So they went with the, I guess, most appealing answers to every question. There's no way to make everybody happy. But they really tried to keep balance in the Force, as it were. It can make the story feel a little muddled and pieced together. It really felt like lots of different people made this movie and threw it together. There were so many important emotional moments that as soon as it's starting to set in that this thing happened, all of a sudden another thing is happening. And so while I was watching the movie, I didn't really have a chance to feel anything. So I sat almost in an overwhelmed, hyper-vigilant state for the whole movie. And that's a lot. I kind of feel like it was 1.5 movies. So, you know, in the Twilight series, Harry Potter series, Hunger Games series, they took that final book and they split it into 2 movies. Now, in all of those cases, it was not necessary to split the story into 2 separate films. But if you had crammed all that information into one film, you would have had an overcrowded mess. So really, each of those movies could have been 1.5 movies. And Honestly, that's what I feel happened with this Star Wars movie. It was more of 1.5 movies. We needed a little bit more development, a little bit more time to breathe. Too much happened too fast, and we ended up with what would have happened if Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows was one movie. So, let's go ahead and talk about the 1.5 movies that Star Wars Rise of Skywalker should have been. There were some really important compromises that had to be made. The original director was not able to finish the film. They decided to have J.J. Abrams come in and finish things up. And so he did the best he could with what was already there. They wanted to finish the movie on time. Otherwise, it could have taken quite a long time to wrap it up. So we'll never know where that movie was going. But what we ended up with overall was pretty satisfying. I think that all things considered, they did the best that they could with Princess Leia. Unfortunately, Carrie Fisher passed away in December of 2016, so she wasn't able to complete her role as Princess Leia. With that considered, they did the best they could with cut and paste and CGI to make it work. There were some moments where it worked really beautifully, and some moments where it felt a little bit forced. But overall, I like what they did with that character and how they wrapped up that storyline and that loose end. Star Wars is an epic saga that has gone on over multiple generations, both in the story world and in real life. It was going to be difficult to pull everything together and tie it up in a nice, neat package. There were some things that were done really well. I feel like the way that Kylo Ren's character and Rey's character were brought together and went against each other was perfect. Of course, the music was absolutely beautiful in the film. It had all of the wonderful Star Wars tropes that we love to see. You know, the stormtroopers are awful shots. Their blasters miss most of the time. There's the dark, crowded cantina style place. There's rusty droids and overcrowded scenes. Everything feels used and abused and worn out, and it really upheld all of those things that we really like about the Star Wars universe. There were some wonderful callbacks to all of the previous films. There's that great sense of light versus dark, and the way that they build up the psychology in it is really fascinating as well. But the overall theme is that you have a choice. It doesn't matter where you come from or who you are or who you think you are. You always have a choice. And really, to some degree, whatever choices you've already made, you can always change your path. And that's a really important theme in the Star Wars movies, in all of them. And that plays out very beautifully in this movie as well. There's the introduction of some new characters that I'm hoping we'll get to see more of in the future. We get to go back and visit places that we've been to in previous films, and we get to say goodbye to so many characters and moments and experiences that some of us literally grew up with. I know I did. With the making of all of the Star Wars story movies, it's probably safe to say that Star Wars movies are always going to get made. The stories will continue. We're going to learn more about the galaxy and the universe and all of the characters that are out there This is evidenced by, the Mandalorian show and some of the animated series that are out there. That's not going to stop. But as far as the trilogies are concerned, there's been such a following over the years. I remember being a teenager, waiting in line for hours to see episode 1 when it came out. I heard stories of my parents waiting in long lines to go and see, episode 5 and 6 when they came out. So it really is an across generations type of saga. And I feel like overall, even though it was kind of a hot mess of a movie, lots of things happening, lots of resolution, so much stuff going on, overall it did a really great job of wrapping up that part of the Star Wars saga. And I'm really happy that I got to see it before I went online and saw all the spoilers, because that's a thing. Well, we're going to take a quick break, then we're going to come back and we're going to talk some more about the Star Wars saga.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. We are talking about Star Wars Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker. I'd like to really get into some of the characters that have been in this newest trilogy. I want to start with Rey, played by Daisy Ridley. She starts off as a scavenger on the planet of Jakku. She was left behind by her family, and she's really just a survivor. She's sort of the quintessential disenfranchised, disconnected character, just out there doing the best she can with a lot of sand. While she's out there surviving, a droid, BB-8, basically falls into her lap, and she ends up getting really roped into quite an adventure as a result. Her journey ends up being pretty interesting. Not just her personal journey, but her storyline is very, very complex. We spend a great deal of the Star Wars movies not really knowing a whole lot about her, just that she is Rey. She has one name. She is a nobody. Her family were nobodies. But still, she has this amazing connection to the Force, and we don't know where that comes from. I mean, as a fan, we've been watching the Star Wars movies for all these years. We knew that something had to have contributed to the midichlorian count in this girl, but we don't know what that is. It's not revealed until the final installment in this trilogy. Don't worry, no spoilers here. So Rey's character, she's very conflicted. She's very emotional. She's very independent. She doesn't really want friends. She doesn't really want help. And she really just wants to sit on her sandy desert planet, hoping that her family comes back for her. So really, she has a lot of hope. She's willing to sit in the middle of nowhere and gather junk and barely have enough to eat and live that solitary life, clinging to the hope that her family is going to come back for her someday. And that powerful hope and drive and commitment really is what gets her character through all of the adventures that she ends up facing. Of course, we know that she ends up training to be a Jedi. She ends up traveling to many worlds. She meets Princess Leia and is mentored by her. She ends up with some very high quality friends. She pilots the Millennium Falcon for a while. And, you know, ultimately, she is the hope that the light side of the Force will overcome the dark once again. She definitely has some parallels in her character to Anakin Skywalker. She is hot-headed, and she really gets stuck on her own point of view. She can be difficult to teach. It's hard for her to let go of things. But really, the psychology behind that makes sense. I mean, she was abandoned on a planet by her family. So that definitely would have had an impact on her personality and the way that she interacts with the world around her. You know, there's a lot of deep trauma with abandonment. And so that would have changed how she copes. She would be a very resilient person who is able to adapt and protect herself. And you add in all of that hope that she carries with her, and you have a character who's fiercely loyal, who understands how to survive. Her grasp of the Force is instinctual for her, and so she's able to fight without really any formal training. And because of those innate abilities, it does make it a little bit more difficult for her to let go and really learn the wisdom that other people around her are trying to give her. When you survive a trauma, you know, the coping mechanisms that you develop in order to get through that trauma really carry with you as you move forward with your life. And it is very difficult to let go of some of those coping mechanisms. And we see some of that in her character. The biggest way that that shows up for her is her longing to be connected to other people. So once Rey has friends, she stays fiercely loyal to them. And when she's introduced to Kylo Ren's character, she doesn't know how to feel about it. She can sense the good and the bad, the light and the dark that's inside of him, and she wants to believe the best in him and be connected to him. It doesn't help that he's her dyad in the Force, and so they are two parts of one greater whole. But she is very conflicted, and whenever she is introduced to new people, she is hesitant before she trusts. She is very driven and very focused on the things that she wants to do. She's a bit of a perfectionist, and that part of her personality really carries through all the way to the end of the series. I think that Daisy Ridley does a great job of showing that inner conflict that she's experiencing as Rey really discovers who she is. I like that her character is faced with the dark side right away. That as soon as she's really introduced to the Force, her mind and her heart immediately want to explore the dark. And it's not necessarily that she's going to turn or go to the dark side. It's more of a curiosity. She wants to know all of the things and really experience everything. She has some abilities and some connections that just are in her, and some of them are even new to the Star Wars world. Things we haven't seen previously until the recent show Mandalorian. Things like force healing start to come up. But overall, Rey's character she's well written. She's an interesting character. I'm glad that she is the Luke Skywalker character for the newest generation of Star Wars fans. It's really cool to see such a powerful woman in a role, somebody who's emotionally complex, who does have trauma in her background, but really is working hard to overcome that and to move forward and, save the worlds, as it were. Well, it looks like it's time for another break, so we're going to go ahead and do that, and when we come back, we're going to keep diving into the Star Wars universe.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Alright, welcome back. We are deep diving into the Star Wars saga. We just finished talking about Rey. Now we're going to talk about Kylo Ren, because you can't talk about one part of the dyad without discussing the other. Kylo Ren was actually born as Ben Solo. He's the son of Princess Leia and Han Solo. He is played by Adam Driver, and he is a very interesting, complex character. He is consumed with hatred. He's full of frenzied tantrums. We see over and over examples of this deep struggle and hate that he has inside him. And when he acts out, he just really doesn't have a whole lot of control. And then we see another side of him where he has remorse for the things he does, even some of the small things that he does. And so you start to see that there's this struggle inside of him that is pretty epic, actually, between light and dark and good and evil. Of course, being, related to Princess Leia, that means his grandfather was Darth Vader. He really looks up to his grandfather. He has his melted, scarred mask in his bedchambers, and he talks to him, and he almost prays to him and asks him to please help guide him to the dark side. It's kind of interesting psychology to think that he idolizes all of the powerful, strong, dark-sided parts of his grandfather, but overlooks and forgets all of the weakness of Anakin Skywalker. I think that's very interesting. And his character really not only idolizes Darth Vader, but even his costume is modeled after Darth Vader. And his ruler, Snoke, actually comments on it and asks him to take off the silly mask. I think that the helmet for Kylo Ren really represents his confidence. When he puts on the helmet, he seems to be pretending to be his grandfather. It's like he can set aside the Skywalker part of himself and really be this other, less human monster type. And he can hide all that remorse and all that conflict behind the mask that's on the helmet. And so other people don't see him as Ben Solo when he's wearing the helmet, and it's easier for him not to see himself that way as well. Putting on a mask can actually be a very powerful thing. So I actually watched the show Masked Singer, and one of the things that a lot of the celebrities that are on that show talk about once they take off their mask and reveal who they are is how freeing and empowering wearing the mask is, because somebody's not judging you for who you really are. You're just being judged for what you're putting out there. And I think that that's a really great way to wrap up what's going on with Kylo Ren, is he is putting out there that he's a Darth Vader type character, but really he is incredibly conflicted on the inside. Now, obviously, he comes from very powerful bloodlines. Being connected to the Force, being a Skywalker, that has its own set of stuff. But then having his father be Han Solo, who's definitely a powerful character as well, a powerful personality, very headstrong, very confident, very forceful in the world, has a bit of a rebellious streak. And really, if you take that and you take the personality of Princess Leia, which is more loyal and she has a lot of integrity and she's very thoughtful and compassionate, you have the two sides, light and dark. And you throw in Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader stuff in there, and you've got a mishmash of a character who could be anything. He could be light, he could be dark, he could be good, he could be evil. And then you've got Snoke. Snoke is kind of like the stereotypical abuser. He really watches Ben Solo, steps in and starts to groom him with the purpose of exploiting him. He really, he takes the time to build up his ego and make him feel good, gives him gifts, gives him starships, gives him weapons, tells him you can do anything, and then asks of him some pretty awful things, and then gaslights him and tears him down and really makes him dependent on that positive feedback that Snoke can give or withhold. And in that way, he really exploits Ben Solo into becoming Kylo Ren, a mega human weapon. And then he uses that to start to run and control the First Order. Now, when it comes to being, a villain, Kylo Ren is absolutely terrifying because he's so unpredictable. I think that when you know that somebody's bad, that's one thing. But when you're not sure when they're going to lash out, that unpredictability, those temper tantrums that he throws, that really makes him not only childish as a character, but that inconsistency is absolutely horrifying. If you've ever had a situation where you're walking on eggshells wondering if you're going to set somebody off, that's an extremely stressful situation. And everybody who's around Kylo Ren has to deal with that every day. And as a moviegoer and somebody who's enjoying, this film experience, I'm watching, and what he's going to do next is really unpredictable. Now, that's captured really well by Adam Driver. He does a good job of showing those subtle conflicts where he has a primary emotion of anger, and then he has those secondary emotions of maybe anxiety or fear or whatever. And sometimes the primary and secondary emotions are in conflict of one another. So he'll get that empowerment from attacking somebody or cutting down his dad, but then he does feel remorseful. He doesn't feel really connected to one side or the other. So he decides in a way that he's going to pave his own path. And while all that's going on, he's so tethered to Rey, and Rey is on her own epic journey, and Rey is so loyal and hopeful that she embodies all the positive things, and Kylo Ren is so hateful and angry, and he really just wants acceptance from somebody, from anybody. And he doesn't feel like he has the acceptance of his family. And this really comes from a deep trauma. You know, when he is a part of the Jedi school and he's learning how to become a Jedi, and his master, Luke, turns on him, even though there's a misunderstanding there, that moment when he wakes up and he sees Luke standing over him in betrayal, everything that he trusted and all of that positivity is broken. And that broken trust creates fear and anger and upset that he can't let go of. He doesn't feel like he has the trust or the commitment or loyalty of anybody around him until Snoke starts to give it to him. I mean, even his father, Han Solo, says there's too much Vader in him. He's lost to us. Princess Leia never lets go of that hope. And she carries that with her really until the end. But nobody else is carrying a torch for him. The only other person who seems to sense that there's any struggle within him is Rey. And that's only because she's so connected to him. And really, it's hard to tell if all those positive things and that remorse is coming from her or if it's coming from inside him. I really believe it's coming from inside him. I think that he was never really that bad of a guy. Even Anakin Skywalker as Darth Vader wasn't all bad. Most bad guys aren't all bad, right? But I really think that Adam Driver does a great job of showing the remorse, of showing that fragile sense of self, and really walking the pathway that Kylo Ren has to walk to get to the place where the story ends up climaxing to in Rise of Skywalker. So, that's what I've got for Kylo Ren and Rey. We're going to take another break, and when we come back, we're going to jump into Mandalorian.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome back. We're going to continue our Star Wars journey by going into the Disney Plus show Mandalorian. It's another Star Wars adventure. It's following a character called the Mandalorian. This show was rated on IMDb as a 9 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 94%. And on Google, 97% of people said they liked it. So overall, a pretty good reception. I personally love the show. It's really a Star Wars journey about all the other characters in the galaxy, the ones that aren't necessarily Jedi, which is really fun for me to see. I love how vibrant of a world they've managed to create on the budget that they have for a show rather than a movie. It has that rusty sort of used feel that you want in a Star Wars movie. In the timeline of the Star Wars saga, it takes place after Return of the Jedi. So everything is sort of fallen apart and the Empire is broken and people are just trying to get by. In case you're not up on the Mandalorian lore, here's a little snapshot for you. So the Mandalorians are a race that come from a planet called Mandalore. This planet's located in the Outer Rim. It has several moons. One of them is Cascadia. On Cascadia, the precious metal called Beskar can be mined. Beskar is a form of iron. The Mandalorians make their armor out of it, and their armor is very unique because Beskar is resilient to lightsabers. So, that makes them a great adversary for Jedi, because that's the primary weapon of a Jedi. So, in the lore of the Mandalorians, on the planet of Mandalore, there was a great war between the Jedi and the Mandalorians. The Mandalorians call it the Purge, and most of the Mandalorians were wiped out. The ones that were left were forced to move on to Concordia, which is one of the moons, and they were forced to mine Beskar. So there's not a lot of Beskar left available out in the galaxy, and most of what is left was mined during the Empire. Now, the Purge and all of that happens before any of the Star Wars movies take place, including before Episode 1 even. And so that's old stuff. So now here we are in the world as it exists in Star Wars after Return of the Jedi. And we are following one of the Mandalorians. They have a sort of a little hive of Mandalorians that nobody really knows about. And they're bounty hunters, really similar to Boba Fett and Jango Fett. They go out, they get their bounties, and they give what they can back to the hive of them that is left. In the lore of Mandalorians, their helmet is very important to them. They don't take their helmet off and reveal their face to anybody. And they say this is the way. So they believe that once you take it off, if somebody sees your face, you cannot put your helmet back on. There's dignity and pride wrapped up in that. So because of that, the main character of this show, who's played by Pablo Pascal, doesn't show his face. And so all of his acting is played out without any facial expressions at all. So it's all in subtle movements of his helmet and gestures with his body and in the dialogue. Now, his dialogue is really well written. He only says what he has to say. There's not a lot of extra talking that happens. I feel like he's a really great character. He comes across as a very straightforward guy, full of integrity, but he draws a hard line in the sand when it comes to work. Like, business is business. If you are the bounty I'm here for, I take that seriously. I'm going to do what needs to be done, and it's not really personal. And he has a very sort of dry way that he interacts with the the people that are around him. But he does act with integrity, and he takes things pretty seriously. Like his word is his bond type of a character. One thing that I really like about this show is that we are getting to know other characters. We're getting to know those people that are sitting in the back of the cantina. We're getting to know the other random people that are out there just trying to get by in this new world that's left behind after the Empire falls and before the New Order has really started. So we've got this character, the Mandalorian, who goes out for a bounty. And by now, if you've been on the internet, you know about Baby Yoda. So he goes out and he rescues Baby Yoda. Baby Yoda is absolutely adorable. Little tiny version of Yoda who doesn't speak yet, but definitely has a grasp of the Force. And there's something about Baby Yoda that connects to Mandalorian, and he makes different choices than he would have ever made before. And we follow him on a journey that's really driven by this connection. Now, there's a couple of things about the show that I want to point out. One is the details are amazing considering that it's a TV show. Like the stormtroopers that are now working as hired hands and like vigilante types. They're all rusted over and dirty and used, like washed up soldiers, who just never took off the armor. I love that Baby Yoda is a thing. He's taken over the internet. I want one. I absolutely want a stuffed Baby Yoda. For some reason, Disney decided that it was more important to keep Baby Yoda a secret for the big Mandalorian reveal than it was to mass market plushies. So, kudos for them for sticking to their, integrity with the show and stuff. But holy moly, it is Christmas time and I want a Baby Yoda for Christmas. Not going to happen this year. That's okay. One thing that does drive me nuts, though, is that in the Jedi world, Yoda he's like the creme de la creme. He's the rock star Jedi. He's the Jedi Master, He leads the council and everything. And yet, all of the people the Mandalorian comes into contact with, except for the empiric or people who hired him to get Baby Yoda, don't seem to understand that there's something significant about this baby, other than he's really cute. Nobody seems to connect that he is in any way significant at all. I feel like Yoda is Jedi famous, and that Jedi famous Yoda would definitely be known out in the universe, and Baby Yoda is not recognized. So I find that really interesting. There doesn't seem to be a lot of that race, and so that might be part of it. So I'm hoping that as the Mandalorian story unfolds for us, we get to know more about that and why nobody seems to know what's so special about this baby. What we do know is that the Empire wants to, or what's left of the Empire wants to do tests on the Baby Yoda, but we don't know why or for what end. So stay tuned for that. There's only one more episode left. I am on the edge of my seat. I can't wait till it comes out next week. It's definitely something big to watch. All right, well, it is time for another break, so we're going to do that, and when we come back, we are going to talk about Jedi Fallen Order.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. So, out in the Star Wars merchandising world, there's a lot going on. One of the biggest recent releases is the Star Wars game Jedi Fallen Order. On stream, it was rated a 9 out of 10. GameStop gave it a 4.5 out of 5. And Google users, 94% of them said that they liked the game. The game was released for PS4, Xbox One, and for PC. Really, overall, this game is the Star Wars game you've been waiting for. It's basically the best Star Wars game since Jedi Academy, if that's your thing. The gameplay really feels a lot like Dark Souls. If you feel like Dark Souls is too difficult of a game for you, don't stress out. There are difficulty settings, so you can always adjust that to fit your own gameplay ability and style. Timeline-wise, the story in this particular game takes place after Revenge of the Sith. And so the Clone Wars and all of that has happened. The Siths have, Darth Maul has fallen. And here you are. You had previously trained as a Jedi, but you didn't finish your training. And you're out here just trying to survive and make a living, scavenger style. And then the game grows from there. So it does have a really good story. The attention to detail is on point. The game itself is a beautiful game, well rendered. The story plays in sort of a linear type fashion. One of the things that's really great about this game is that it's not a massive multiplayer online only type of game. Those are very, very popular right now. Things like Fortnite, Battlefront, this isn't like those games. This is a single player, you work through the storyline, type of a game. It's really reminiscent of the movies. It has some callbacks and things that are built into the world in the game. There's some customization available for your lightsaber. As you go through the game, you're opening up skill trees, so the more that you do things inside the game, you unlock skills and force abilities. So it's pretty neat because it progresses in a pretty logical way. There's some pretty fun boss fights in there. There's some puzzles that you have to work out and use the Force for. Now, with some of those puzzles, though, they're kind of difficult to master. Some of them, they could have been a little bit more precise or worked in just a little bit better. But overall, I can see what they're going for, and the puzzles definitely have a place in the game, and it does make sense with the use of the Force. Some of the psychology in the game is great. The character has some PTSD type of elements, so the story is really rich in that type of way. He's working through some survivor's remorse and the woulda, shoulda, couldas, and there's definitely some depth to that backstory. One of the things that I didn't like about the game is the backtracking. So there's no fast traveling in the game. And so if you are on a planet and you need to go and get a chest to complete that area, you work your way through and you fight all the guys and do all the things, and then you get your chest, and now you've got to go back through it all to get back to your ship. That's cool when you're on your way through it for the first time, but it gets a little repetitive when you have to redo, like, some of the bad guys, like, respawn and that sort of thing. It gets, it drags on a little bit. So if fast traveling were added to the game, that would really sharpen it up a little. The overarching story in the game, you are playing Cal. He's being hunted by a villain called the Second Sister, and a colleague of hers called the Ninth Sister. Both of them were trained by Darth Vader. As you work your way through the game, of course, there's going to be a droid, and there's the ships and all of that kind of thing. I don't want to give too much away because I don't think that's fair, because the game really unfolds in a nice, intuitive way. Overall, though, it's an action-adventure game. You jump into the situation, you have a lightsaber, you learn your force powers, and you basically work your way through it. There's very good fighting styles inside the game. I've heard some people compare the gameplay to Batman Arkham Asylum, and I've also heard that it really feels better in this game. I haven't played Batman Arkham Asylum, but I believe that those reviews are probably correct. It looks like the game has actually won Game of the Year from Titanium Awards, Best Game Design, and Best Adventure Game from Titanium Awards. And for the Game Critics Awards, was nominated for Best of Show, Best Console Game, and Best Action Adventure Game. That's not bad for a game that just came out. Overall, though, if you want to play a game where you're just overwhelmingly yielding the Force to destroy characters, Force Unleashed is the game you want to go with. But if you're really looking to be a Jedi and grow and experience the story and that kind of a game, that more immersive story-based type of play, then this is the game that you're going to want to go with. I do want to also mention Battlefront 2. That is the rinse and repeat type of game style where you're playing with other people. You are thrown in randomly as either, the good guys or the bad guys, and you battle it out. You can upgrade your characters. They did add some extra little gems to the game. Those gems really tie into the Rise of the Skywalker movie that just came out. There's a new planet that you can go and play co-op on. So definitely, if you haven't played in a while, you definitely want to go in there. Because you can go to Jakku, you can go to a Starkiller base, and join the co-op rotation as well. So there's some more fun Star Wars game updates for you. Of course, the Star Wars craze has really taken over games in general. Another game to jump on the Star Wars bandwagon was Fortnite. So Stormtroopers have actually crashed in the Fortnite game. You can even find loot crates that give you lightsabers to fight with, and they are incredibly powerful and lots of fun. You can harvest with them, you can kill with them, and you can even block oncoming attacks. The sound effects are super fun, and you even do some of the fun gymnastics, like flip in the air type moves when you've got one of the lightsabers. There's several lightsabers that you can choose from. of different colors that signify different characters. The Kylo Ren one, it looks really cool in the game. I like to play with maces because purple is awesome. So that's something. And when you fight the stormtroopers, they loot drop blasters for you, and so there's some challenges and stuff related to, attacking other players with blasters, and of course they make that very specific to Star Wars pew 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 type of sound, so that's a lot of fun. It won't last forever, so definitely get in there and play while you can. And of course, in the shop, you can buy skins that are tied to Star Wars. I know Rey was in there, Kylo Ren was available, even a red Sith Stormtrooper was available, so that's kind of neat. So keep an eye out for that. Yeah, lots of Star Wars stuff happening in the game world. Alright, well, we're gonna go to another break, and when we come back, we're gonna continue on our Star Wars journey. Alright, welcome back. We are getting ready to wrap up our Star Wars journey today, and we can't do that without discussing the saga as a whole. So, when it comes to movie watching and movie binging, I am a huge fan. I love to marathon just about anything, but when it comes to storylines, I really like to watch movies in the order of release. So a great example of this is the Marvel films. There are so many Marvel films, Avenger films, the offshoots, the shows, and all of that. Well, I am crazy enough that I decided to watch every Marvel movie and every Marvel show in the order as they were released. So that meant I was watching season 1 of this show, and then this movie, and then season 2 and 3 of this show, and so on and so forth. I feel like I'm a purist in that way because whoever created these stories, they released in that order, and they released in that order for all kinds of reasons, but as more movies are layered on and come out in the same universe, there's Easter eggs, and there's callbacks, and there's all that wonderful stuff that you get to know as you go further through, in the order that they were released. Now, even though I believe you should watch them in the order they were released, I know not everybody feels that way, and there are some people who really want to experience the Star Wars journey according to the actual Star Wars timeline. So, even though it kills a little piece of my purist soul, I went ahead and figured this out for you so that you can go forth into the world and experience Star Wars in chronological timeline order. So, here we go. Starting out your Star Wars adventure, you're definitely going to want to start with Episode 1, Phantom Menace. Now, of course, the first trilogy really follows Anakin's journey. And so this is when we first meet the Anakin Skywalker character on Tatooine. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi save him from being an indentured worker and bring him in front of the Jedi Council, where wise Master Yoda senses conflict in him. And then his story sort of goes on from there. In episode 2, Attack of the Clones, which would be the second movie that you're going to watch in your timeline chronological viewing, is episode 2, Attack of the Clones. In this one, Anakin is older. He has been assigned to help protect Padme. And, of course, there's some feelings there. As the story progresses, he finds out that his mother has been killed and he takes revenge, therefore giving a piece of himself over to the dark side. Now, if you really want to experience things in timeline order, this is when you would want to watch the Clone Wars animated series. There's several seasons of it. It's a really great show. It gives you a lot more depth and information about the Star Wars universe. So I'm just going to throw out there that would be in the timeline the place to watch that. However, if you wish to just stick to the movies themselves, I can totally respect that. And so this is where we would go with episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. The Chancellor has been captured by General Grievous. Obi-Wan and Anakin try to rescue him. Anakin is really falling over into the dark side, and there's really no coming back by the end of it. So that's where we're at in this saga right now. After episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, you would want to watch Solo, A Star Wars Story. That's the origin story of Han Solo, of course. I really liked this movie, even though overall it didn't get great reviews. I thought it was clever and funny, and I just must have really been in the mood for it when I watched it. But it gave me everything that I wanted in a Han Solo story, so I'm happy with it. After the Han Solo story, you're going to want to watch Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Of course, Disney tries to call this a standalone movie, but let's be honest, it's really a prequel to Death Star World. So I'm just going to throw that out there. But it is a good movie. I love how it ends. I'm really glad they did what they did. I'm not going to, spoil it for you, but really great storytelling. I enjoyed it. The next one in the set is going to be episode 4, A New Hope. Of course, this is the first of the Star Wars movies to be released in theaters. So we're going old school here. This is where we are introduced to the Luke Skywalker saga. So we've already seen Anakin's journey. Now it's time to see his son's journey. So Luke and Leia set out on their adventure. They meet Han Solo, and they go forth into the galaxy. The next one is episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. This one is one of my favorites. I love Hoth and the whole, just everything that happens on that planet makes me happy. Han and the Carbonite, Boba Fett. Oh my gosh, it's just such a good movie. And, of course, next is going to be Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Now, Episode 5 is one of my favorites, but Episode 6, even though overall I hear that people don't love it, it's my favorite. I'm sorry, but come on. Ewoks, it has the stereotypical Princess Leia in the gold, come on, Anyway, great movie. I love it. And now, if you're following the timeline strictly and you're including the shows in that, this is where you would want to stop with the movies and watch Mandalorian. This is when Mandalorian takes place about 5 years after Return of the Jedi, and well before The Force Awakens happens. So go ahead and choose that. I highly recommend that you watch Mandalorian, whether or not you watch it in between episode 6 and 7. Alright, now back to the movies. We are looking at The Force Awakens. The Force Awakens is the start of the journey of Rey and her friends Finn and Poe as they move forward into the Star Wars story. It takes place about 30 years after Return of the Jedi. It has all of our old favorite characters, so Princess Leia and Luke. And then a new villain, Kylo Ren, makes his appearance. And we talked a lot about that character earlier. After The Force Awakens, you're going to want to watch The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi is really the start of Rey coming into her own and really learning about the Jedi and sort of taking the flame from Luke. So there's that. And then last but certainly not least is Star Wars Episode 9, Rise of the Skywalker, which I reviewed at the start of this podcast. It's in theaters now. I highly recommend that you go and see it, probably multiple times, because holy moly, so much happens in that movie. I am sitting here now after talking about Star Wars for an hour. I'm still thinking about new little details and new little characters, and I'm going to have to go see it again. So, there you have it, folks. An entire Star Wars journey in an hour. Thank you for hanging in there with me. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for listening to the GSMC Sci-Fi podcast brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Please, please remember to subscribe to the show. If you write us a review, it really helps. I'm new at this, so it'll really help me out. Also, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the things. Thank you, have a great night, and may the Force be with you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.